I'd like to welcome Admiral Fagan, Master Chief Jones, and I'm eager to discuss the capabilities and challenges facing our United States Coast Guard. Today, we come together to assess the Coast Guard's operations, capabilities, and challenges to ensure that this indispensable military service is equipped with the resources, support, and guidance it needs to fulfill its vital role. The Coast Guard's mission set is wide-ranging and very demanding. It simultaneously plays roles as a military service, a law enforcement agency, a regulatory agency, all in allowing the organization to execute its missions. This broad mission set requires bravery, resilience, and tireless pursuit of excellence from Coast Guard men and women. I stand committed to the safety and security of our nation's waters and recognize the unwavering dedication of the men and women who serve in the United States Coast Guard. We have made tremendous strides in recent years to modernize the Coast Guard cutter fleet, enhance readiness, and adapt to an ever-evolving threat landscape. The National Security Cutter Acquisition Program has matured, and some of those assets are in the fleet doing great work. Last Congress, we authorized an additional $650 million for continued acquisition of offshore patrol cutters, 2 of which will be home ported in Kodiak, Alaska. But one area where we are desperately lagging behind competitors, particularly Russia, is our ability to operate freely in the Arctic. America is an Arctic nation because of Alaska. My state is on the front line of competition in the Arctic and serves as a safeguard for the United States against such threats emanating from this critical region. I have long emphasized the important role the Coast Guard plays in ensuring that we counter the authoritarian aggression of the hostile regimes in Russia and China. At no point was this more evident than last September, when a group of Chinese and Russian naval vessels operating together off the Aleutian Island chain in Alaska was posing, in my view, an unnecessary threat to our state and country. Continuous presence in the Arctic is essential to this effort, and the Coast Guard must be able to operate in the Arctic at will, the way the Russians do. To help ensure that we can do so, I included a provision in the FY 2019 National Defense Authorization Act to authorize the construction of 6 Polar-class icebreakers, polar security cutters, as the Coast Guard calls them. And this committee later reiterated that support in the Coast Guard bill. I'm excited that we were able to move forward with the acquisition of these critical assets, and we're starting to build them. But I have serious concerns about the delays in the production of the polar security cutters and the impacts to our nation's security that these delays can cause. Last year, I helped authorize $150 million for the procurement of a commercially available icebreaker to help bring the United States additional offshore icebreaking capability long before the delivery of the polar security cutters, which we are building. While the appropriations for that icebreaker were included in the Coast Guard, included in an appropriations bill at the last minute in the omnibus last year, still trying to figure out why they were removed, literally, at the last minute. I'm confident that we will secure the funding for the Coast Guard to purchase this much-needed icebreaker in FY '24. It is in the President's budget, again, as it was last year, and I'm glad to see it will be home ported in Juneau, Alaska. Admiral, I look forward to continuing to work with you on that. Last month, Admiral Fagan and I, with Senator Murkowski, traveled to Alaska for the 17th Coast Guard District Change of Command ceremony in Juneau. We also visited Coast Guard facilities in Cordova and Kodiak, where we saw firsthand the struggles the service was facing in recruiting and retaining members, both in its military and civilian workforce. I know that the service is working hard to address recruiting and retention issues, but there is still much work to be done. The service has missed its recruiting goals for the past 4 fiscal years and continues to struggle to keep members within the organization. Retention issues are particularly high for personnel stationed in remote areas, especially in Alaska, Admiral, you and I got to see that firsthand a couple of weeks ago. Access to healthcare providers, affordable housing, and childcare remain challenging. These challenges decrease the quality of life for Coast Guard members and may influence their decision whether to remain with the Coast Guard or not. Additionally, Coast Guard members, unlike their counterparts in the other military branches, do not have the guarantee of being paid during a government shutdown. This is completely unacceptable. To fix this, I have repeatedly introduced different versions of the Pay Our Coast Guard Act, but a permanent solution has not yet been managed to get a floor vote. You have my commitment to continue to work on that with both of you. Admiral, I know that you are taking actions to address the recruiting and retention issues on your end. Be assured I'm working to do what I can to ensure the Coast Guard members will continue to get paid the way the other services do in the event of a government shutdown. Lastly, like the chairman, who issued a very powerful, heartfelt, and important opening statement, I must express that I'm deeply disturbed by the recent news about the travesties that occurred at the Coast Guard Academy. There's no place for sexual assault, sexual harassment in our society, particularly not in our military. It is essential that members of our armed forces feel safe, and it is unacceptable that institutions and leaders that were supposed to protect them failed to do so. Furthermore, when the Coast Guard failed to disclose to Congress the receipt of these reports and subsequent investigations, the service obstructed our ability to conduct vigorous oversight. This is what we are doing right now. This is exactly the type of gross mismanagement that congressional oversight is designed to protect against. This cannot be allowed to happen again. Thank you, and I look forward to the valuable insights and discussions that will shape the future of the United States Coast Guard. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to follow up on this questioning to begin with. Just as I mentioned in my opening statement, the Coast Guard Academy's handling of the sexual assault allegations in the 1990s is deplorable, unacceptable, and can't happen again. The fact that the organization knew that this had happened years ago but didn't tell anyone is also unacceptable. Admiral, I want to commend you for your June 30th message to all Coast Guard members. I'd like to submit that for the record.
Without objection.
And one of the things that you mentioned in that message to all Coast Guard members is that, and I think this is important, the investigation occurred between 1988 and 2006. Is that correct?
That is the time frame, and that was the period where sexual assaults were not being appropriately handled at the Coast Guard Academy when they were reported.
And then importantly, in the statement and in your statement today, and even in the questioning you just answered from the chair, you mentioned over the past several years we have made major improvements to our policies regarding sexual assault, and you list a number of them. I'm not going to have you list them all here, but I think that's important for people to understand that in the last several years you have made important strides. Can you commit to the committee as part of this hearing to submit for the record a very detailed listing of all of these major improvements? I'm not going to have you do it now, but I do think it's important for the committee and more importantly for members of the Coast Guard to know that and have confidence in that. Can I get your commitment to do that? As just consider that a detailed question for the record here?
Yeah, I commit to providing all of that to the committee.
As much detail as possible. Let me ask again, on the issue of the prosecution of sexual assault and sexual harassment out of the chain of command, as you know, that issue has been something we have been debating on the Armed Services Committee, on which I sit for almost a decade. I want to commend Senator Gillibrand in particular for her leadership on that. Has the Coast Guard undertaken similar actions, and were you required to by law, or was that another instance where the DOD had something different from the Coast Guard, but you've done it anyways, your statement mentions that you're doing it, but I'd like to know the legal and statutory basis for doing that. And how is that going?
So the National Defense Authorization Act that required the stand-up of the special prosecuting attorney offices applied to the Department of Defense, not us. We have moved.
Not you.
It did not apply to us.
Okay.
We have moved to do exactly that. We have, last year, we selected a one-star admiral. That office is being stood up in Portsmouth, Virginia. We're staffing it. This year, it will be up and fully functional and provide complete alignment with the intent with regard to appropriate handling of sexual assault cases in the military. And it's been a significant effort, but it's exactly where we need to be as a service to ensure that we're taking reports of sexual assault seriously and that they're being appropriately adjudicated and prosecuted within the UCMJ.
So you did that even though you weren't required to under the law the way the Department of Defense was?
We did it because it's the right thing to do to ensure as a military service that we're meeting the needs of our members.
I think, Madam Chair, it's an issue we should probably look at whether or not we need to legislate just to establish that the way the other services have done. And then one more thing, and I think it's very important, and I know you've already said it, but it's really important for this committee. Can I get your assurances that this type of investigation will never again be withheld from the Congress?
Yeah, I fully commit that the not reporting this investigation is inconsistent with my commitment to transparency, my respect for the oversight that this committee appropriately exercises over the organization. I am committed to bringing the organization forward and ensuring that we've got the appropriate culture of transparency and accountability and are responsive to the committee.
Thank you. Let me turn to another topic that you and I have talked a lot about that I know matters to you. It certainly matters to me. It matters to our country, and that's the Polar Security Cutter Acquisition Program, the commercially available icebreaker to fill the gap. This is an issue that I think every American should care about, whether you live in Florida or Texas or Alaska. We are an Arctic nation, as I mentioned. The Russians currently have over 50 icebreakers and are building more. 50. Some of which are nuclear powered, many of which have serious weapons on them. And we have 2, and 1 is broken. I think we have less icebreakers in Singapore, and they're near the equator. This is just completely unacceptable. My time has expired, but Madam Chair, I do want to just ask, and I'll follow up in the second round of questioning. Admiral, you've been a strong supporter of both of these programs. Can you give me an update first on the Polar Security Cutter acquisition lags that we are seeing and what we are expecting in terms of the building of our own Polar Security Cutters? And perhaps I'll leave to the second round of questioning the commercially available issue that you and I have worked on. And again, I appreciate the Coast Guard working so hard to get that in the President's budget again. It was in the President's budget last year and somehow got removed at the end of the omnibus, which still rankles me. But on the lag time on the building of the Polar Security Cutters.
So thank you. We're committed to the Polar Security Cutter and that contract. We're an Arctic nation. It is critical to our national security, and we continue to engage in the Joint Program Office with the Navy to ensure that we field that critical capacity and capability for the nation. The shipyard that the contract was awarded to was recently purchased and is now owned by Bollinger, Mississippi. We're working with the owner on accelerating detailed design, understanding what and definitizing the schedule and any implications with regard to new cost estimates. I was at that yard just a few weeks ago. They've welded a test coupon. I am confident we are going to begin building that ship as we go into the next calendar year, early in the next calendar year. It'll be at least a 4-year project to build that ship, and I understand that puts Deep Freeze 2028 potentially at risk, but we continue to engage with the shipyard and with the leadership there to accelerate into the work that is critical to getting that ship building begun and then fielding and executing it on behalf of the nation.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me go back, Admiral, to the issue of all the icebreakers. I think, can you commit to this committee to give let's call it a every 6 months update on the Polar Security Cutter and the Great Lakes Security Cutter that you just mentioned? I think it would be good to have regular updates on those acquisitions and building programs.
Now, I commit to providing regular updates. Thank you.
Let me turn to the commercially available. This was the idea. Started in the Trump administration. This committee was supporting it. The Biden administration continued it. The idea of purchasing a commercially available icebreaker to fill this gap in the 2022 Coast Guard Authorization Act. We authorized the transfer of NOAA land in Juneau to the Coast Guard, which the Coast Guard would use to home port the commercial icebreaker once it's purchased in addition to other activities. Can you provide an update on the NOAA land transfer in Juneau that will support home porting an icebreaker, and perhaps give a timeline more broadly on, assuming we get the appropriation this year for that purchase, what would you see as kind of the timeline? I know we have other infrastructure needs. I can confidently say between this committee and the Appropriations Committee that we will be able to support what the Coast Guard needs for that. But finally getting an icebreaker in America's Arctic is going to be really important, not just for Alaska, but for America. As I mentioned, we are getting, in terms of strategic competition and great power competition in the Arctic, it's not even close. We need presence. We need ships. We need icebreakers in particular.
Yeah, I am 100% committed to the commercially available icebreaker, and when appropriated, we look forward to operating that vessel on behalf of the nation. Once the appropriation is made and we're able to procure the icebreaker, and you alluded to it, right there will be some initial work that needs to be done on the vessel to bring it to an initial operating capacity and allow us to begin operating it in the Arctic. And we're working to understand cost for life cycle cost and maintenance cost with regard to that vessel, and we'll continue to work in the committee as we work to field that critical capacity needed now for the nation. We are working through the real property acquisition discussions. I can provide with you a timeline as to where we actually are with regard to the property in Juneau. As you know, we saw it recently on our trip up there, and look forward to providing the committee with the timeline and financial support needed to ensure that we've got infrastructure in place to operate an icebreaker in the high north.
Great. Well, just keep us posted. We want to stay ahead of that on this committee. We don't want to be the ones behind on that. Let me ask another question. The 2022 Coast Guard Authorization Act contained a key provision from my Arctic Focus Act directing the Coast Guard to report on the ability to conduct a transit of the Northern Sea Route and periodic transits of the Northwest Passage. What are the capabilities of the Coast Guard to make a Northern Sea Route transit, and what lessons can be learned from the recent Northwest Passage transit?
So we continue to operate the icebreaking capacity we have. Healy, our medium icebreaker, will depart, or has departed, or will depart Seattle shortly for another transit through the high latitudes and Arctic. Lessons were learned from her last transit, which was a complete circumnavigation, and happy to provide you and your staff with any lessons or insights with regard to Healy's recent operations. As Polar Security Cutter comes online, it'll obviously create more opportunity and capacity for that kind of presence and learning opportunity as we operate more persistently in the high latitudes.
Great, thank you. Let me ask, turning to another acquisition program, The Coast Guard has done much to recapitalize its fleet over the last 15 years. I want to compliment the Coast Guard. The national security cutters and the fast response cutters are performing way above expectations and are doing great work for this country. However, the OPC program is significantly behind schedule. Can you provide an update to that, Admiral? And are you confident that the recent timelines that you have put forward on OPC delivery, including the two which, as I mentioned, will be home ported in Kodiak, are coming online soon enough? And again, the NSCs and the fast response cutters are doing a great job, and perhaps you might want to touch on that as well.
Yeah, thank you. The national security cutters have been we've been operating them for 10+ years now and have been incredibly capable ships, and you know that we are able to periodically operate the national security cutters in the Bering and other locations, just providing great capability and presence. Fast response cutters, same kind of increased capability and capacity. And, you know, we'll have fast response cutters. We have fast response cutters operating in the state of Alaska. The offshore patrol cutter that Argus is OPC-1. We have experienced some delays in the launch of OPC-1. There was a shafting issue that's resulted in a delay of several weeks, and we believe Argus will be launched by the end of this year, and that's a likely year delay in delivery date. OPC and Polar Security Cutter are my two top acquisition priorities. They're absolutely essential to the nation. The offshore patrol cutter is replacing, you know, ships that are 50+ years old, the 210-foot cutters and 270-foot cutters, and so continuing to move forward with speed and intent on the OPC is a priority for the organization. I look forward to seeing Argus in the water soon.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Senator Warnock. I'm going to have a few final questions before we wrap up this hearing. Admiral, actually, and Master Chief, I want to get your views on the recruiting challenges. And by the way, all the services are having recruiting challenges, as you know. What actions has the Coast Guard taken to address your recruiting challenges, and what do your projections show about the health of your workforce moving forward?
Well, I'd like to thank the committee for the support that we have received to help address some of the recruiting challenge we've faced as an organization. We've been able to increase recruiter capacity, open new recruiting offices, and begin to just elevate awareness of who we are as an organization. We have made significant progress in recruiting. At this point in the year, we have onboarded more people into Cape May than we did the entirety of last year.
Good.
But there is still work to do. The talent management, workforce management work that we have embarked on will help make the service more attractive and to retain those members that we bring in. I am committed across the suite of levers that we have to recruit, make the service attractive to those who have a propensity to serve, and then to retain those members and their families once they've entered service. And again, I really appreciate the support that we have had, and we will continue to lean into.
And my understanding is your retention rates are actually pretty good. Is that true?
The retention rates are
re-enlistment. I mean retention.
They're good. We have had a slight uptick in sort of decrease in retention in this past year. It is unclear at this point what that is a result of. Is it a kind of a re-leveling post-COVID? I don't know. At this point, I'm satisfied with where our retention numbers are. This is really an initial recruiting challenge for the enlisted workforce, in which one of the reasons why the Cape May investments become so critical as we continue to onboard that enlisted force into the service.
Do you have a view on the recruiting issues, Master?
Thank you, Senator. In addition to all the comments that the Commandant made, other investments are with our recruiters. We've invested in software that allows them, it's quicker to get from contact to a young member to actually getting them signed up and into boot camp. Those investments has helped. Thank you very much to the staff there. The wonderful news that we have is, while we don't have enough people coming into Cape May, the quality of human being that's coming into our United States Coast Guard is second to none.
Good.
I mean, they're absolutely the best this country has to offer. We need more. So we are very excited in that capacity, and we're doing a lot of efforts internally in the organization to where we simply tell our story better. We, as serving Sentinels, do a better job. As the Commandant says quite often, when people know about the Coast Guard, we've got them. They love the Coast Guard. They want to be part of
Well,
the
let
Coast
me
Guard.
follow up with a related question. The Coast Guard Act of 2022 required the Coast Guard to maintain at least one JROTC program in every Coast Guard district. How do you view this as a potential recruiting tool to tell your story, and can we expect to see a JROTC program in Alaska soon pursuant to that Coast Guard Authorization Act provision from 2022?
We have been onboarding JROTC programs as well, and we're moving deliberately to expand those programs. We intend to comply with the Coast Guard Act. Look forward to working with your staff on where that is timing-wise. It has been a great tool for increasing awareness of who we are as a service, and look forward to continuing to increase investments in the JROTC program.
Great. Let me turn to another topic, Admiral, that you and I have talked about a lot. I have a very comprehensive bill that the Coast Guard helped my team and I and Senator Whitehouse's team draft. It's called the Fish Act, which is all about going after IUU fishing and the importance of combating IUU fishing as it relates to sustainable fisheries, but also, let's face it, strategic competition with the Chinese Communist Party, which directs these gray fleets that ravage fisheries throughout the world. Oftentimes, countries in Latin America or in Africa, the only recourse they have to even trying to combat these Chinese fleets is assistance from the United States Coast Guard. Can you tell this committee the importance of that issue as it relates to our fisheries, but also strategic competition with China? I'm trying to get our Fish Act marked up here in the Commerce Committee soon, and I want to get a sense from you how you think that's an urgent issue. And I want to thank the Coast Guard for helping my team and Senator Whitehouse's team draft a lot of that bill.
Yep. Illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing is a global issue. Several years ago, the Coast Guard published an IUUF strategy to bring focus and alignment to the global scourge that is IUU fishing. We have worked to provide leadership across regions where IUU fishing is occurring. We've got great examples where bilateral fish rider agreements between the United States and a small island nation provide a great way to take that nation's organic sovereignty and law enforcement authorities over their own fishing stocks. That person comes onto a Coast Guard cutter, and we are able to help them provide a presence and, again, enforce their own sovereignty and protect their natural resources. We continue to engage, across the globe with other Coast Guards and navies to work to bring regional alignment to IUU fishing. It's a sovereignty issue, it's a theft issue, and left unchecked, it erodes the norms of maritime governance, and it needs to be addressed.
Let me end here with two questions relating to Alaska shipping, and then I see our chairman is here as well, which is welcome. Can you give me an update on the Waterways Commerce Cutter Program, and more specifically, the home porting decisions for the replacement for your inland buoy tenders, one of which happens to be located in Petersburg, Alaska, and I've worked with your predecessors on making sure Petersburg has coverage. That's a really important community in my state, a great fishing community that's also been very supportive of the Coast Guard over the years.
The Waterway Commerce Cutter is a critical acquisition for the nation. The cutters that we will replace with that acquisition program, some of them have been in service 70-plus years, that we owe our workforce in the maritime transportation system updated, current, modern waterway commerce cutters. And we'll continue to work forward with that acquisition to field those. And I've got a sense of urgency around the need to replace that capacity. We'll come to you and your staff with regard to we're still working through the phasing and home port decisions and laydowns as those ships come online, and happy to provide you details on.
Okay, that's an important community in my state to continue a Coast Guard presence. So I'd like to get details from you, Admiral, and your team on that one as it relates to Petersburg. And then second, you and I talked about this when we were traveling with Senator Murkowski recently, and this relates to the Coast Guard asset in the city of Valdez. In 2021, Valdez was designated a Coast Guard city. As you know, that's not easy to do. You got to meet a lot of important commitments to do that. The city is very proud of that designation. Unfortunately, the city is concerned that the Coast Guard has no plans to replace the U.S. cutter Liberty when it retires in a few years. And as you know, Admiral, since you've spent a lot of time out there, this is a really strategic area for Alaska, but also for America. The Trans-Alaska Pipeline terminates at the Valdez Marine Terminal, and that's a very significant amount of the nation's oil supply. Valdez is the northernmost ice-free port and supplies military munitions to 5 U.S. military bases located in Alaska. The Port of Valdez is a very large salmon fishery, handles close to 70 million in fish exports annually, and the port handles cargo and needed logistics equipment for major gold mines and mining in Delta and Fairbanks, and construction equipment for resource development throughout the state, including the North Slope of Alaska. And perhaps we can discuss this in more detail. I'd like the Coast Guard to look at extending the life of the Liberty in terms of its being ported in Valdez, and look at other replacement options and maybe some ideas that you have that the city and municipality of Valdez can do to partner with the Coast Guard to get a new vessel. So can I get your views on that? Just you and I have talked about it, but I'd like to get your views.
Thank you. And we remain focused to the commitment with regard to the fast response cutters that we're in the process of fielding in Alaska. The fast response cutter is a much more capable vessel than the 87s. The 87s frequently experience weather limits. As you know, it's a demanding operating environment up there. But I commit to working with you as we continue to look at how we meet our response requirements throughout the state of Alaska and understand the criticality of Valdez, particularly with the oil terminal and the salmon fishery. But look forward to working with you to ensure that that community has appropriate coverage.
Great, thank you. This concludes our hearing. The hearing record will remain open for 2 weeks until July 27th. Any senators who would like to submit questions for the record should do so by July 27th. We ask that your responses be returned to the committee as quickly as possible, and in no case later than 2 weeks after receipt. Again, I want to thank you, Admiral, Master Chief, for your testimony today. And I want to once again, on behalf of the U.S. Senate, please make sure you're telling the men and women of the Coast Guard how much we appreciate their outstanding efforts keeping our country, our fishermen, our coasts, so many Americans safe. Such an important service, the Coast Guard. And you have our commitment to always be strong supporters of the U.S. Coast Guard. That concludes the hearing.